Hey, this week we talk about Proton. We talk about some weird and exciting news from Nvidia. There's an Audacity release. There's a couple of new distros out, and QEMU has a pretty big bump for version 9. You don't want to miss it, so stay tuned.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is the Untitled Linux Show, episode 149, recorded April 27th. 585 pages of AWK. Hey, it is Saturday, and you know what that means. It is time for the Untitled Linux Show. Get ready for some unbridled Linux geekiness. We're going to talk about GPUs. We're going to talk about distros, all kinds of stuff. It's going to be a blast. Glad to see everybody here. Glad to see the crew. Not exactly the normal crew. Good to have David stepping in for Rob. That loser isn't here today. And then Ken and Jeff, of course, are here. Good to have each of you. And we've got some interesting, tantalizing even, surprising even news to cover. It's not terribly surprising, though, the story that we're going to start with, and that is Jeff is going to talk about the Proton release candidate. And we sort of knew this was coming, but Jeff, give us the lowdown.
Well, it could be a little surprising how well games work on Linux, but getting into that, Proton 9.0 release candidate 2 is released. And, I think I'm known on the show as the gaming person, and it, seems fitting that I cover Proton release candidate 2. And, let me step back slightly and say, for those that don't know, Proton is the program that lets Steam users play Windows games on Linux. It's built on Wine, and then Steam adds some patches on top, which are not official Wine release, either because they're too new, maybe they don't meet some standard for Wine, or just haven't trickled into the main repository yet. Proton can move faster, so they can try new things before the official repository does. It's also game focused, so while there's, some pretty alpha versions of Wine with the new stuff added, they focus on other things as well, where Proton is strictly games. Because Valve is who does that, and they only do games because Valve is the parent company behind Steam. So Proton 9 is based off of Wine 9, which Codeweavers has also been helping with this project. The Proton project is in addition to Wine. And Codeweavers does a lot of work with helping Wine improve as well. They're kind of the base company behind Wine. Proton 9 itself comes with new versions of VK D3D Proton, VXVK, and DXVK NV API. So basically those are graphics translations engines for Windows games. So converting, like, for example, DirectX into Vulkan commands. Most of the fixes, if you look through, are to do with specific games, but there's some audio improvements in general, making sounds work better in several games and fixing audio controls and spatialization in VR chat with AV Pro. They've also added handling for more than 8-axis input devices. And a lot of the rest of the things are fixing crashes in games. Some games had memory leaks, which were fixed. For example, when real-time weather was turned on in Microsoft Flight Emulator, it caused a lot of issues. So now you should be able to turn on real-time weather and things will go a lot better. They've also limited the CPU cores seen by some games, which would crash because it saw too many cores. So, too much of a good...
That was quite the interesting problem. Very specific problem, too. I remember a friend of mine ran into that, and it's like, this has got to be the most specific bug ever. And so it's like, if you have one of AMD's big, 128 core processors, I think is what it had to be. It's like, it would crash these games. It's hilarious.
Yeah, it, totally couldn't play them. And, this was games like Far Cry 2, Far Cry 4, Witcher 2, Assassins of Kings, Enhanced Edition, and Lara Croft and the Guardian of Light, just to name a few. Many others, but we're not going to go into all of them. There's also regressions fixed in such games as Overwatch 2 randomly crashing, Age of Empires works again, Sea of Thieves is playable on the Steam Deck again, Borderlands Game of the Year Edition is playable again along with many others. I'm not going to list all the fixes here, but there's a link in the article in the show notes to the GitHub page where you can see everything. So if you have a game where you're having issues, you can check out the release notes to see if they fixed what you were seeing. So happy gaming, everybody.
Yeah, so we have a question coming in from Joe Pruitt over on YouTube. Wants to know, is easy anti-cheat still an issue on Linux?
Yes. It depends on which one you're using, because they'll fix it and then sometimes anti-cheat will make some changes, but there have been anti-cheat companies working with Proton to actually make it work better. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be very game specific. Yeah,
there are enough Steam Decks out in the world now that game companies are starting to look at it and go, yeah, it'd be really nice if our game would actually work on that platform, and starting to put some effort into making things work. Yeah, so there are still a few where it is a problem, but it's getting better.
The most important question for Linux gaming right now is, do all the Fallout games work?
As far as I know, they do.
Yeah, I think so.
I don't know about 76, but I don't think nobody cares about 76.
That is true.
There's a hot take for you.
Some shade being thrown there.
Yeah.
I completely agree.
But I have played 3, New Vegas, and 4 on Linux. Yeah. And actually, I just finished Fallout 6. Far Cry 6.
Fallout 6, living in the future, man. No, it has surprised and delighted me over the past few months. There's been a couple of times now that it's like a shiny new game. Hey, it goes on sale. That's not terribly much. Buy it, get it, download it, and then go to run it, and it doesn't run. Well, you go over to Proton DB, and if it's a popular enough game, there's a really good chance that someone will have found a workaround for it. So cool, and then you do the workaround and it makes it run, and then like an update or two later, which for a lot of these happens pretty quick, that workaround is now included in the base game, and so it works now for everybody on Linux. And it's a normal part of game development now that they look at. And the downside of this is they're not looking at, does it work on Linux, but they're looking at, does it work on Proton, which is kind of a mixed bag. We've talked about that in the past, this idea of the Windows API as the video game layer on Linux becoming a thing, and whether or not that's good or not. But yeah, if nothing else, it's cool that they pretty much, with a few exceptions and some easy anti-cheat exceptions, they pretty much all just work.
And one of the things too that people cite for having the Windows, like DirectX as the Linux gaming API is the stability. Mm-hmm. There is complaints that making it run on Linux natively, it changes too much versus the API always stays the same on Windows. Yeah. So we've got a question from Mira Aurora, which is, will it run Crysis? Yes, it will. Well, I was going to say there is a way to figure that out. Let's see if I can quickly hit the right buttons here. Yeah, so you can go to ProtonDB and just search it. And will it run Crysis? Crysis is a gold level, which means you may have to go in and tweak one or two things, but once you do, it'll run perfectly. Crysis 2 is platinum. Crysis 3 is also platinum, which means it just works, runs perfectly out of the box. So, and I can tell you from user experience, they work.
And what does silver mean?
Silver is going to mean that you have minor issues while running. It's playable, but you'll run into issues that you wouldn't see on Windows. And then you get all the way down to I think bronze means there's major issues. And
so you'd get an exact same experience as you get on Windows.
Yeah, gold means the same experience. Silver means you will see minor issues. And let's see.
Like, for example, bronze, maybe the cutscenes don't work or some of the audio doesn't play, but it's usually, I think it's usually finishable if it's bronze.
somewhere in there, because every once in a while you have a game where the final cutscene will just fail to ever play because of some weird reason, and then the bottom tier is garbage. It doesn't work at all. Just don't even try.
Or so many large chunks are broken that it's not playable.
Yeah, not playable.
So then you get OBS Studio running, so you can capture it to stream it into Twitch, or to just record the audio.
And this is how you become a YouTuber. Now, I suppose the question is, how do you handle your audio editing, Ken? Do you still use Audacity for that?
Yes, I do. In fact, Bobby Borisov wrote about the latest version of my favorite open source audio editing software, Audacity 3.5. Major changes include pitch shifting, automatic tempo detection, and cloud project saving to, this is a new website, folks, audio.com. Now, according to audio.com's About page, it is a free creator-first platform that's part of the Muse Group family. Additionally, Audacity 3.5 has made several changes to enhance user experience and accessibility. They moved the OK and cancel buttons of effects to the bottom of their respective windows. The plugin manager has been reworked. Thank you, David Bells, for improving the accessibility features and making the software more usable for individuals with disabilities. He's the one that pushed that into the GitHub, into the repository. Mm-hmm. However, with new updates comes some removals. Some of the niche features removed include the karaoke view. I never use that myself.
Yeah.
The vocal reduction and isolation effect, and the screenshot too. I always use the one that came with Linux.
Yeah.
Bobby's article also includes a link to the changelog if you want detailed information about all the changes and bug fixes. Audacity 3.5 can be downloaded from GitHub as an app image or via Flatpak.
Yeah, it's been kind of... people have worried about this back when Audacity got taken over by the Muse Group. It made a lot of people really nervous about it as software. And there were a couple of things that were done that were a little odd. But ever since then, it's like they realized what they had and who they were working with, and finally got their act together. And it's been some solid releases since then. And pulling out the old crufty stuff that nobody uses, that's just part of every project. In fact, a lot of projects need it more than they are doing, because the open source developers, sometimes we get a little skittish about pulling things out. Like, what if somebody uses that? Like, the last time somebody used that was in 1997, man. Just karaoke's not a thing in this country anymore. Let's just pull it. It's like, nobody in Japan is using Audacity to run their karaoke machines anymore.
I think they're hoping they'll use audio.com to access for the music they want to use karaoke with.
Yeah, and that sounds like it could be a pretty cool value add that kind of respects the users, right? Because having a place to be able to put this up in the cloud, like, that's useful if you have something that's really important you're working on, you want to get backed up, or even you want to be able to work on it from multiple places. So long as it's not doing any of that automatically, which I don't think it is, then it's just a new feature that adds something that could be useful to people.
Yeah, it's not going to be automatic, because when I was looking into audio.com, I found you do need to create an account on there before you can even upload.
There you go. Yeah, that's one of those sketchy things that some websites do, Facebook, where it creates accounts for everybody, whether or not you've actually intentionally made one. Don't do that.
Bump those numbers.
Give you the option of having up to 5 projects going on simultaneously.
Yeah.
If you're going to want to,
I'm sure if you pay them, they'd let you have more than 5.
Yep, they give you a subscription option that you can use if you want to go more than 5 simultaneous projects.
Yeah. David, did you want to get something in there before we move on?
No, I was just going to make comment. You could probably find some machine somewhere in Japan that runs Audacity on their karaoke. There's always that one outlier.
Yeah, it's possible. The reason that that's a joke about Japan, that's not a racial thing. It's just karaoke is still really, really big in Japan. That's one of their cultural things.
Absolutely.
So, anyway, David, let's talk. Let's say David is taking over the distro hopper corner for today. He is the distro hopper today. He is the one that hops.
Yes. It's very rare for me, but I'm filling in for Rob, so I figured I actually had something to talk about, so I was going to hold down the distro hopper corner. So my link in the show notes is actually to an older blog post, but it's specifically about Bluefin. I talked about Bluefin last time I was a guest host on here, and I tried it out about a week later. I had it on a computer for about 2 weeks, so yes, you can already tell I didn't continue using it. But it's not a knock against Bluefin at all. But of those 2 weeks, it was on a secondary computer, and I ran it probably a total of 10 to 12 hours. The biggest challenge for me was just getting my head around an atomic operating system, installing things through FlatHub, Flatpaks. It was a really large paradigm shift, and one that I couldn't just do what I needed to do. So I ended up switching OSs, which I will touch on briefly at the end of this. But the one thing I will say, I've got an Asus A17. I actually have two of them, which I've always had trouble getting drivers to work. BIOS-specific things, they both have Nvidia GPUs in them, discrete GPUs. But I like AMD processors better than Intel processors. So I've got quite the combination of driver challenges. It just worked. So that part of Bluefin absolutely works the way they advertise. I was able to go select an ISO, put the Asus A17. Actually, I don't think they went all the way to A17, but it was Asus specific drivers. Select the GPU drivers, and it built an ISO that I installed, and everything just worked. So that is pretty impressive on its own. From there, the concept of running everything inside containers, I'm a little bit old school, so I still think about things more in terms of VMs and containers, and trying to make that jump was a little too hard for me. So I ended up giving up because I had a new project. Specifically, I'm getting into Flutter development. So when I started learning Flutter development and going through their code labs and everything, most of their instructions and their command line things were around the Ubuntu OS. So instead of trying to figure out how to make that work on Bluefin, because I needed to get up and running, I actually switched to Kubuntu, which is kind of funny because we've been ragging on them since they're not getting the latest version of KDE.
Yes.
But there again, the A17 I installed it on is an older one, and it also just worked with the Nvidia binary drivers and everything. So the long and the short of it is I have not changed distros since I was originally a guest host, and now I've changed 2 distros in the period of like 3 weeks. But it's all working well.
That's fun. Now, Bluefin is based on Fedora.
Yes.
The one that you were running, was it based on Fedora 40?
No, it was not. It was 39.
Okay, interesting.
Because it was before 30. It was before 40 came out, and it was not a pre-release. It was official release.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I have not taken the jump to a immutable distro. I don't know that I will. I'm too much of a power user. I like to be able to get to my file system and mess around with stuff. As I've told many people, the reason that I know what I know about computers is that I've spent so much of my life breaking my own computers and then having to fix them.
Yeah. My use case is a little bit different because I do so much development that the idea of a developer laptop where I'm free to develop in Linux, but not have to worry about an update necessarily breaking anything, because that's then downtime for me. The concept is interesting, so I may explore it again.
Yeah. David, I'm curious, and this is not directly related to the show, but what languages would you consider yourself to be fluent in? Like, which languages are your expertise?
Web dev around the Python stack. So
Okay.
Python, Nginx, MySQL, or
you do some-
MyraDB.
You do some Flask stuff too, right?
Yeah, Flask.
Yeah, we talked about that briefly.
Yep.
I have this mental map of my friends that I know that are really skilled with particular languages, because I am a total jack of all trades. I will be doing a project in C++ one day and then move to JavaScript and then do something in Python and Perl. I'm not amazing at any of these languages. Like, just yesterday or today, I, for the first time, worked with a C++ shared pointer. And it's like my brain is melting out of my ears as I'm trying to understand, all right, what exactly does this do? How is this actually related to the C pointer that I actually understand? So I have this mental map of people that I can reach out to. So David is now on the list for Python and Flask work. That's good. That's good to know.
Basically anything around the web dev stack. So JavaScript on the client side. I've never done any Node.js stuff on the server side. It's all client side JavaScript. Python on the server side.
Got it. All right. So we kind of touched on this, but there is something else that is new that is out, and that is Fedora 40 has released this week, and I've got linked up the fedoramagazine.org coverage, and there's a lot of new stuff there. One of the things that we've been talking about for the longest time is KDE 6 and some of the fun stuff that happened there. There are other things that are in it, though. There's new AI or GPU acceleration. So, like, there is a PyTorch package now, which is really interesting. That's the first time I think that Fedora has actually shipped PyTorch. With Fedora 40, they are actually shipping RockM 6 and large portions of that. And so here, before you get too excited, the line here is, we are also shipping with RockM 6, which is the open source software that provides acceleration support for AMD graphics cards. We plan to have that enabled for PyTorch in a future release. So there's an asterisk there. Not everything that you want to do is going to work, but it's so much closer than it has been. And then, of course, there's your normal updates. It's a new version of GCC. It's a new version of Python. Your kernels at latest release. All of that good stuff. And I've got to say, I've been running Fedora 40 now for like 2 months, since it was still in Rawhide, or maybe just had branched Rawhide. No, since it was in Rawhide, because I had to go back and manually downgrade from where it started grabbing Fedora 41 packages. So I went to Fedora 40 before it branched. And it's been great. It has been solid. I've had fewer problems on my Rawhide Fedora install on my desktop than my wife has on her stable Fedora like 38 or 39 install on her desktop. So in fact, it's on the to-do list to upgrade her to Fedora 40 and see if that helps some of her weird problems go away. Anyway, it's been fun, and anyone looking to distro hop, Fedora's nice. Come on in.
And if you have any problems, go ahead and visit the Ask Fedora user support forum.
There's
I just posted the links.
There's a couple of great places to get help. The Fedora folks seem to be pretty good about answering questions and helping folks out.
Not to get you in trouble, so you can plead the fifth here, but is it user error, OS error, or hardware issues that is the difference between 38 and 40?
Yes.
I think it is weird interactions between hardware and software. We finally tracked down one of her outstanding issues was actually, I think, a bad SATA cable, and that was causing some weird issues with one of the hard drives in her machine. And then she's got another weird problem where inside, she runs KDE, and inside Dolphin, she cannot drag and drop files and folders. And it gives her this bizarre error about the desktop portal. which shouldn't even be hooked into this. And it's apparently a known problem. And the solution right now is upgrade to KDE 6. So it's coming soon. We'll fix one handful of problems and probably discover some more, because she is just gifted. And it's not user error. I'll sit down and watch what she's doing. It's like, yeah, you're doing it the right way. It explodes when you do it, and it doesn't when I do it. And I don't know why.
Karma.
No, it's really not.
Now, if it was karma, it'd be the other way around, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yep. This is true.
I keep trying to get her on Kubuntu. It's been close a couple times.
Yeah, well, remember, you got to support it if you get her to move. All right. Well, Jeff, let's talk about Nvidia. This is one of the stories that's really surprised me. We're gonna let Jeff kick this off, and then I've got some thoughts and things to add. But lay the table out before us, Jeff.
Okay. I think it was last week, maybe the week before, we talked about Nvidia hiring the lead developer of the Novu project. And Novu is a project to have an open source driver for Nvidia, which, because of how Nvidia releases information, they haven't been forthcoming on their hardware. The open source driver project has been having a lot of problems, and basically for the last several generations, they can't get full speed out of the cards. The cards, when they boot up, are in kind of a beginner, slower clock speed, and the driver can then kick them into higher speeds. Well, NVIDIA's never released how to do that, so the Nouveau project it's been struggling a lot. Well, then NVIDIA released their kernel firmware and have been open sourcing their kernel driver, though it isn't fully open source yet. And NVIDIA has been making a move to open up their kernel driver, but keep in mind things like CUDA are in user space and still locked down. So certain, decode video drivers, the CUDA stack, a lot of that stuff, it might not ever go open source, but it's not in the kernel. It's in user space, which it's more acceptable to have closed source there than it is inside the kernel. Mm-hmm. So, and never before has this happened, or at least in the consumer space. I can't talk about their enterprise hardware drivers, which are open sourced, or at least more open than their consumer drivers. NVIDIA developer Arthur Hillett, who is not the previous lead of the Nouveau project, that would be Ben Skeggs, has opened up a pull request, and this pull request is for the Mesa NVK driver. So the pull request is for implementing conservative rasterization in the NVK driver. The basic translation is the VK underscore EXT underscore conservative underscore rasterization extension is added to the driver. Basically, it's adding a Vulkan extension. And it actually started out as a community Vulkan driver, part of Nouveau. So they're taking that code, they made some adjustments and tweaks. Now they're adding it to the NVK driver, which is the open source NVIDIA driver. So kind of like AMD, NVIDIA's got their proprietary lockdown driver where nothing's open. Now they've got this NVK where they're opening it up. But again, it's not fully open source. And we've talked about before how you can make it open source, but it's a little tough right now. There's some switches you got to go in and throw, and some hoops you got to jump through to actually use the open source code. But it's improving, and they're still working in that direction to make it easier, and eventually it will become the default. It's just not there yet. Yeah. There is good. Oh, there is a lot of activity on the mailing lists about open source involvement, and Michael Larrable of Phronix, where this article came from, does go on to say that while the plans of open sourcing the driver are not really clear, so they don't have a very good roadmap yet, they are contributing to the kernel and Mesa components. So, but and he also mentions there's no movement on the user side components, and Michael quips that he doubts that these components will ever get open sourced. Mm-hmm. I guess never say never, but I wouldn't hold my breath waiting. That's probably out of ways.
Yeah, it's fair to say.
And we did talk last week about some open sourcing, and I mentioned Nvidia is doing this because I bet you there's money tied to it somewhere. Well, the article does go on and say that this open sourcing effort is based on increased customer and potential customer interest in open source drivers support for the driver. There's, probably some use cases, possibly safety critical, where, having Mesa graphic components opened up will work well. And even with other parts of the driver staying closed. And he also does call out that AMD is enjoying a lot of success because of their open source driver support, and they've developed a strong following because of that. So, NVIDIA going open source, this is shaping up to be kind of a strange year.
Indeed. I had a thought when I was reading through that, and he mentioned that idea of safety critical. And one of the things that came to mind is you've got some of these NVIDIA cards in particular. I had to support a desktop for a while, that if the closed source driver for whatever reason failed to load, and or like you updated the kernel and the closed source driver would fail, the machine wouldn't even boot up all the way. Like it would hang partway through boot, and they were just a huge pain to try to get working again. And it kind of makes me wonder if there's even like a legal requirement because of I can't think of the word now. I'm having tip of the tongue syndrome, but whether there could be a case where legally Nvidia is on the hook because their hardware wouldn't run because their proprietary driver died. Like, and that's just something I had
liability.
Thank you. Liability is the word I was looking for. It made me think, like, is there a liability issue there? And I don't know, maybe, but if it were me, I would not want my hardware to completely fall on its face if one of the two drivers died.
Well, and I think it also opens up, if you think, let's just take a prime example, automotive. Mm-hmm. Well, you have certain case, and this is just pure kind of made up scenario. I don't have any inside information here, but you got things like Tesla where they said, okay, we're using the cameras and not the radar. Mm-hmm. Well, that GPU is really good for image processing, and you need a lot of power to recognize people versus trees and whatnot. And if there's an error in there, then you're on the hook until NVIDIA can fix it, versus, oh, it's open source, then Tesla or one of their subcons or whoever can just get in there right away and take care of it quickly. And it's not all laying at NVIDIA's feet. And I'm sure they want to kind of back away from that a little bit.
Yeah. So two things to mention there. One, Tesla does run NVIDIA hardware. That is a thing that we know. But I don't think they're running x86 hardware. I'm pretty sure they are running like Tegra, NVIDIA Tegra chips. I don't know that 100%, but I believe that is the case. And that's always been the weird thing for several years now. That's been one of the weird things about NVIDIA. They have open source Tegra stuff, because one of the reasons is Tegra is designed to run on Android. And so they open sourced a lot of that. And it was just their desktop chips that were so closed source and so hard to work with. And I've joked with a friend who does work on Tegra stuff. It's like they have a dissociative disorder, personality disorder over at NVIDIA, depending upon which product you're working with. It's like working with two entirely different people. So in a way, we could say that their desktop chip driver team are now finally getting on the bandwagon that Tegra has been on the whole time.
Or you've got certain companies trying to save money and going, we don't want to pay for a Tegra chip, but hey, we can get a 3070 chip a lot cheaper.
No, yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure there's a multitude of stories we will never know the details of, but there's a multitude of stories like that led to this. It's very unlikely that it was one thing in particular. Maybe one thing was the straw that broke the camel's back, but this has been an ongoing thing for a while, I'm sure.
And a lot of the infrastructure runs on Linux, which, as their cards keep getting better, the line between consumer graphics cards and their enterprise stuff it's starting to blur a little more.
Yeah. Well, it's fairly common for the actual dies to be the same between the two, isn't it?
very similar. Not always the same. Because sometimes they're stressing certain parts of the core more than others. Like for your enterprise stuff, you don't need a bunch of 3D, but maybe you need a little more pipeline in the memory. But I mean, you're pretty close. I mean, it's kind of like if you look at like a AMD EPYC chip versus the consumer level.
That's what I was thinking about. Was that one in particular?
Yeah, there's a lot that's pretty similar. It's just, okay, the enterprise supports, some of the memory parity bits, so you can have the verified memory and some other higher lane count on PCIe, but they're probably 95% the same.
I think in some cases, and I may be wrong here, but I'm pretty sure I've seen that in some cases, it's literally the same die shot, and then they just bin them, and the different binnings will go out into different products, some of them being enterprise and some of them being consumer.
And it could be that way.
And with consumers, that including smartphone displays?
Smartphone displays. I feel like this is a segue. I'm not sure where we're going with it.
I'm lost too.
No, it's actually just a question because...
because Tegra.
Okay. Well,
there's a lot of displays on smartphones, and I'm trying to think who all makes the graphics drivers for them, other than Qualcomm.
Yeah, so I mean, Nvidia has the Tegra. The Tegra was originally intended to be their mobile chip. That was Nvidia trying to break into the mobile market, and they've done very well with it. You've got Nvidia with the Tegra line. You've got Qualcomm has their Snapdragon, which I think they just released some Snapdragon-based laptops. I've not seen reviews of those yet, but I think that was supposed to happen. You've got a couple of there's like I think is it Samsung with the Xenios, something like that. But yeah, there's 3 or 4 of those guys that do like really heavily into smartphone manufacturers.
And when you get into the smartphone market like that, you're dealing with SoCs, system on chip, right? Mm-hmm. So that Tegra would have the GPU built into it.
Well, that's interesting though, because we've kind of come to the point to now where all of our CPUs are SoCs. Like SoCs have won in the same way that microcomputers beat out mini computers back years and years ago. Everything is an SoC now. Like all of AMD and all of Intel's CPUs have little tiny GPU cores on them now. So, all right.
Even with the Nintendo Switch, correct?
And the Nintendo Switch is, I'm pretty sure, an Nvidia Tegra.
Nvidia.
Yeah.
It is. Yep. It's like because Xbox and PlayStation are both AMD.
The huge security problem on I think it was the first generation Switch, where you could literally go into bootloader mode with a paperclip. That was because they just reused everything out of Android, including being able to go into bootloader mode. And so if you knew the right pin to tickle while it was being booted up, you could just flash the bootloader. It's fun stuff. All right, Ken, let's talk about, yeah, that was a big oops. Let's talk about FlatHub. I think that is what is up next. FlatHub for Linux, and somebody got a makeover.
Yes, in fact, Liam Dahl shares his review of FlatHub's recent makeover. He states, the new update brings a rotating featured banner with 5 apps updated weekly, an app of the day listing, a tab section for trending, and it gives a new app, which is a new app grouping, as well as popular, new, and updated tabs. I also looked around FlatHub, and I found an option to search for apps at the top of the page, in addition to what Liam had already described. Scrolling down the whole page shows you 6 apps from the following categories: productivity, graphics and photography, audio and video, education, games, networking, developer tools, science, and utilities. At the very bottom of the homepage is, of course, the obligatory footer where you can find various links to include FlatHub's RSS feeds, their community forum, and statistics. The statistic page is where you can find the total downloads. When I checked, it was 1,850,950,732, and that was as of yesterday, the 26th of April. Now, downloads per country, category distribution, and with that, the highest was games at 610, and then the next one was utilities. It was 17 below the games. When you select an application, its page displays the application's logo. It also has lists the owner or author of the Flatpak and whether they have been verified. At least one screenshot of the app is in use. If more than one screenshot, you will have dots indicating the total number of screenshots and the ability to scroll left or right through them. A brief description of the application, followed by the beginning of its latest changelog, along with the link to launch the full changelog. Then next shown as you scroll down is whether FlatHub considers it safe or unsafe based on permissions required, or if the code is auditable or not. You can also get information about the installed size, download size, available architectures. I did notice some that were for ARM as well as x86. Mm-hmm. Then you can see the total installs, links for the project website, and the option to browse the code. This is then followed by other apps by the owner or author. I agree with Liam that it is nice to see FlatHub continue to evolve and improve.
Yeah, I very much like their revamp there. It looks great, very modern look. You mentioned ARM64, and it made me wonder: is there RISC-V support yet on FlatHub? And I see a ticket here about the question. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if this is a thing that's happened yet. I don't think so. Looks like they are fundraising for it at this point. Because of course, to be able to do that, you've got to have some hardware to be able to test it on, and
or at least an emulator.
Well, no. To be able to really do it properly, you've got to have real hardware to be able to test things on and do builds. Something as kind of a big a deal as FlatHub, I would not be willing to do builds or testing on an emulator because there's always the chance that something is not quite the same. Are you dealing with an emulator bug or are you dealing with a hardware bug? So. It doesn't look like it's there yet, but I would imagine that is coming soon. Cool. I meant to mention just a minute ago, I've got a link in here from Brody, who is a YouTuber that I've gotten told about from the KDE guys over on the Fedora project. We'll go to his stuff from time to time, and it's about the same Nvidia story, just a little bit more thoughts on it, but. The thing that tickled me about it that I thought was hilarious, the reason that I mention it here, is he splits the difference on the pronunciation. So we always used to call it no view, which is a slightly derogatory slang term. And then we got told, no, that's actually pronounced nouveau. It's French, which, yes, of course, that is the way that it's supposed to be pronounced. Brody just pronounces it novo. It's right in the middle. Kind of like that. I'm going to start calling it novo from now on, I think. All right,
and with a little bit of no, I was gonna say there's a little bit of no view because I know personally it always gave me fits. Nothing but problems.
Yeah, it was such an uphill battle for the developers because they were doing it in their spare time and they had no support from Nvidia until very recently. So, all right, David, take it away and let's talk about Thunderbird and Rust.
Indeed. So I've got a link to a blog post from Thunderbird. We've been following Thunderbird's advancement with some interest, off and on, especially those of us that have to connect to enterprise systems like Microsoft Exchange, Microsoft 365. And so there's a blog post titled Adventures in Rust, Bringing Exchange Support to Thunderbird. And I found it a very interesting read. They've got some historical context, which is interesting. Everything, if you're a Linux open source nut, or, and if you're watching us, you are, of course. It's just really cool. They talk about why they chose Rust, which, Rust is the new coolness when it comes to low-level programming, memory safety probably being the biggest one, but you get some performance benefits and modularity, the ecosystem around it. But they do talk about some of the mishaps they had. Specifically, they talk about how Thunderbird and how the Thunderbird and Firefox code bases are tied together in non-obvious ways, and the challenges that caused their build system to integrate Rust into, which is quite interesting. But then after they worked through all that, they started talking about actually implementing Exchange support in Rust. They talk about some of the challenges around how you send the request and handling the responses, and they have a flowchart of communication in there. And they talk about what's next. So the key takeaways, though, is that they expect to have it out in July. So I'm looking forward to that. Mm-hmm. They're only going to be supporting email. They're pushing calendar and something else off. I don't remember what it was. I'm trying to scan through here. Okay, so there were 3 things that they're planning on supporting, and I give up. Email was the only thing that they're supporting right now in their push for July. They hope to have it ready for testing in July. So I'm definitely planning on jumping on board and testing it. There's a plugin called OWL that supports Office 365 right now, and I've tried that a couple of different times and never with good success. So I'm really hoping that their integrated support going forward works quite well. But it's an interesting read from a technical standpoint.
It is calendar and address book support. That is the thing.
Address book. That's what I was forgetting. Thank you.
Yes. Calendar, I don't know how many people know this, but like calendar is a big deal. A good calendar inside your email client is one of the reasons why Outlook got so popular, because the calendar tends to just work. And particularly for like high level people that have to have their calendar working, like they have to have their personal assistant be able to manage their calendar. It was killer. Like that is one of the reasons why Outlook took off and everybody in the business world used it. And so if Thunderbird can really nail the calendar stuff and to make it work with Exchange, it'll be great. Hopefully they nail it and they can do it right.
Calendar is so important that I actually subscribe to a service that bridges calendars, and so I've got Gmail calendars that sync to Office 365 calendars that sync to other calendars and everything. So
at work, everything's through Outlook, and we live and die by our calendar, all the meetings and everything. And
absolutely. And if for whatever reason you're, because people they'll email you calendar invites and all of this. And if for whatever reason that doesn't work, like for those of us that don't use Outlook and just use either something on the system or Google Calendar, it's like you got to manually put it in there sometimes, and it's a pain. It would be nice if the calendar stuff just worked.
And
not
if
yet.
They send you an update that moves it. It's not automatic. All that, they expect you to accept it or reject it, or
Are you going to make the meeting? You didn't accept my calendar invite. Yes, I'll be at the meeting. Oh yes, been there, done that.
Yeah, I on average probably have 3 to 4 meetings a day, and sometimes less, sometimes more. And like you said, we got to add people. We got to change the time. We're changing the venue. All the auto updates and where I work, everything is Outlook, so we don't have to fight with any other calendars. But I mean, anybody outside the company, it's always a little more painful for them sometimes.
Yep. Jeff is there taking them for the team. He goes to the meeting, so the guys actually doing the research don't have to.
Exactly.
What's that, Ken?
I was going to ask, do they have that incorporated into Microsoft SharePoint?
Oh, I don't know. I've never actually used SharePoint. I've never interacted with SharePoint. I know it's cool, I guess, and all, but I just have never touched it.
It's a pain. Or at least it was for a couple of years I used it.
Yeah.
We tie in with SharePoint, Teams, Zoom. We get Jira's, Confluence. all tied in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you use MS Teams is actually just a front end built on SharePoint. SharePoint's running underneath.
Is it well? I mean that explains a few things.
Because you can have channels, you got directories, file systems, all sorts of features in Teams.
Yep.
But I will be honest, if you're going to have a meeting, I much rather have it in Zoom than Teams. Zoom is more flexible.
Yeah. It humored me to no end when the XZ story broke. It was a Microsoft engineer that found that. And when he found it, it was because SSH logins were taking half a second longer than they should have. And the joke that everybody made, and it was hilarious at Microsoft's expense, was he apparently wasn't an engineer on the Teams project because there's no way they would be able to tell that much lag time. It's just imperceptible, a drop in the bucket if you're used to Teams. All right, let's chat about, let's see what is up next. Look like Jeff, take it away. Let's talk about Ubuntu.
Yes. So if people want to run a modern operating system, Fedora 40, it came out on Tuesday. Ubuntu came out on Thursday. You want to run an old operating system? Well, you want to run the new operating system. So Ubuntu 24.04, and I call it the Ubuntu Corner this week because I've got 3 stories related to the release. And first up, Marius Nestor talking about the release. And, it comes with the 6.8 kernel, which is really new. And it comes with GNOME 46. There's brand new firmware updater and NetPlan 1.0, which helps with network management. And we've talked about all these in the past in much more detail, but there's also links in the article if you want to go back and read up about them if you've since forgotten. Mozilla Thunderbird is now a snap, which can be good or bad depending on your proclivities on snaps in general. Personally, I'm indifferent. I'm okay with snaps. I'm okay with regular distribution methods. This release also comes with a new Flutter-based graphical installer, which is capable of updating itself and has a lot of accessibility features and supports ZFS installations. The YouTuber DistroTube spent some time installing 24.04, and he shows how the new installer looks. And, everybody seems to think it's a good improvement and even better than the version that came in 23.10. 24.04 also has out-of-the-box support for Raspberry Pi 5 and year 2038 support for the ARM HF architecture. 2038, for those who don't know, is when the 32-bit number in Linux, which counts the second since January 1st, 1970, rolls over. Kind of like the year 2000 scare in Windows, but 2038's pretty much been addressed in almost all Linux platforms, so by the time it actually gets here, it's not going to be anything to worry about. There's a lot of other benefits to 2404, so check out the article linked in the show notes for the full details. Moving to the second article, we see the official flavors are also now released as well in the Ubuntu world. This includes Kubuntu, which I personally run, Xbuntu, Lubuntu, Ubuntu Unity, Ubuntu Cinnamon, Edbuntu, Ubuntu Studio, Ubuntu Mate or Mate, Ubuntu Budgie, and Ubuntu Klein. I think it's Klein, K-Y-L-I-N. That's a lot of official flavors, and I'm sure the unofficial flavors will soon follow suit. One negative that I will bring out, that Kubuntu and Ubuntu Studio both ship with KDE Plasma 5.27, which is end of life. There is a lot of talk, though, that there's going to be a method of upgrading to KDE 6 once some of the churn of the release finishes out. All official flavors come with all the features of the standard Ubuntu 2404, except when it's tied to the desktop. The article in the show notes lists all the versions of the desktop that each flavors comes with, so take a look in the article and you can look up your favorite flavor to see which versions of desktop it comes with. Other than KDE, though, the rest come with very up-to-date desktops. One point of note, though, that unlike standard Ubuntu, and this is from the official website, Ubuntu Budgie and Klein will only have 3 years of support. So take note there. Excuse me. Moving to the last article, I thought I would throw in from our good benchmarking friend Michael Larrable over at Phoronix. He took a Ryzen 9 7950X and a Core i9 14900K and benchmarked Ubuntu 22.04, 2310, and 24.04. It didn't make its own article because there isn't much to say. Pardon me, a little tickle in the throat there. There isn't much to say that can't be summed up in a couple of sentences. If you're going to go from 2204 to 2404, you are going to see a little performance boost. Not sure you're actually going to notice it, but in some cases you will, such as if you're using the AMD open source driver. 2310 and 2404 are pretty close, but 2404 is the fastest, but the difference is getting down into the noise. Bottom line, 2404 is in good shape performance-wise. Those who are on an older version of Ubuntu or an Ubuntu flavor will probably see an update option in a week or two, as they like to let those who do the manual upgrades work the servers hard at first. Then when things calm down a little bit, then they give you the push button update for the rest of the people that don't want to go into the command line and update. If you have a very mission critical system, there is, a lot of people will say they will wait for the 24.04.1 version to release before they actually update, to let the new version bake a little while before they upgrade for those, systems that have to have the most uptime.
So let's see, a couple of things here. You mentioned the Raspberry Pi 5 image. I've also been told that there is the Star 5, the Vision 5 2, which is the RISC-V board that a lot of us got, apparently also has an official Ubuntu image with the latest release. So that is interesting. On my to-do list to get that installed here and give it a try. Let's see, there was something else. Keith in the chat mentions the 2038 fixes are annoying. Some packages have to have T64 added onto the end of the package names, and it's causing some dependency issues, which I did not know that. I did not know that in some cases was a name bump to go to that. That's interesting. And yes, it's fixed in Linux, but how many old Unix operating systems still run who knows what and is just going to lose their minds in 2038?
True, but at that point, that's what, another 14 years away. That's going to be a really old system. Not saying they won't be out there, but that's kind of the equivalent of running a Commodore 64 at that point.
Yeah, that's true.
I'd hope if it's really important, you would have updated, or the hardware hopefully died and you had to upgrade in there somewhere.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is only the nuclear arsenal will still be running it.
Yeah.
I did not need that nightmare. Thank you very much.
I actually came across an article about 24.04 that was a bit of a rant, and I'm not running 2404. I'm still running 2310 on my relatively fresh Kubuntu install. But they said that Ubuntu has promoted the snaps over debs, and that you cannot install a deb package with the GUI package installer. But they said that started in 2310, so I just tested it on my Kubuntu machine sitting here, and it's not true for me. So I'm not 100% sure if this rant is accurate or not, but they do link to some GitHub issues around it, and Canonical saying that they'll don't have capacity to work on that right now, and they might address it in the future. So,
well, and
this thing that we forced everybody to do that you want us to fix, we don't have capacity to make that change.
And we have covered in the past how to, if, for example, in Ubuntu, if Firefox is a snap, if you want to not have it as a snap and you want to pull directly from the repositories and build it from the .deb package, we've talked about there's articles out there on how to do that, and so that you won't have it as a snap ever.
Firefox got sick of this and actually started publishing their own .deb, didn't they?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. That's
they
fun.
did.
Yep.
And that was the example we used, how how to go through. You uninstall it. You then point to the deb version, and there's a setting in Ubuntu that you set so it says never look for the snap, and then you will always pull from a .deb.
I just refreshed the rant a little bit and looked at it, and what I realized that I did experience what they're talking about. By default, with a fresh install of 2310, if you double click a .deb file, it opens in the archiver and shows you the contents instead of taking you to the software. You have to do the open with and select the software installer, and then you can set it to use that, and from then on it'll do it. And I did that, which is why I didn't notice an issue when I just tested.
I'm not entirely sure that's related to snaps. That almost sounds like a security feature to try to save users from accidentally installing sketchy .debs that they've downloaded off the internet.
Could make sense, yeah.
I kind of like that, actually. It should not be easy. It should not be trivial to accidentally install a package that you have downloaded from the internet. That is a little difficult on purpose, and it probably should be.
And that functionality does not really match the start of the post.
Right.
So I think the rant might be slightly illegitimate. Moving on.
Illegitimate rants? People angry over things that aren't that big a deal? Does that ever happen in open source?
No, never.
Well, I'm thinking open source.
Of course not. It's all that they're always happening.
Yeah. Go, Jeff.
I'm just thinking, if you can't, open source, if you can't trust strangers on the internet, who can you trust?
Oh, goodness.
He said he was legit.
Yeah, he did. All my other software gets downloaded from the internet. What's wrong with this one?
Yeah.
Ken, save us. Let's talk about QEMU. With looks like a really interesting update here. What's up with QEMU 9?
That's a good question. According to Marius Nestor, the open source QEMU 9.0 machine emulator and virtualization software has been released as a major update that brings various new features and improvements for ARM, RISC-V, Lungarch, S390X, and Hewlett-Packard Precision Architecture, or some of y'all may call it HPPA emulation. Some of the highlights of QEMU 9.0 include multi-queue support for the virtio.blk block driver, allowing different queues of a single disk to be processed by different I/O threads, the ability to concurrently handle pre-allocation of memory backends using multiple threads in some cases, and support for the mapped RAM capability, allowing for more efficient virtual machine snapshots. Checkpoint restart support for the virtual function I/O, and improved support for zero-page detection. For ARM, there is board support for the MPS Dev Board plus AN536 firmware, or some people may know it as MP3-AN536. And then there's ST Microelectronics B-L475E-IoT01A Internet of Things node. And my favorite, the Raspberry Pi 4 Model B. However, the devs note that the fact that QEMU does not yet model PCI or Ethernet for the Raspberry Pi 4 Model B, which will be added in a future release. That sounds like a few other companies' phrasing. But they did say that the Raspberry Pi boards now support the SPI and BSC I2C controller. ARM support also gained additional I/O, disk, USB, SPI, and Ethernet controller, and timer support for the Freescale i.MX6, Allwinner R40 Banana Pi, NPCM7X series, and Vert boards, as well as architectural feature support for enhanced counter virtualization, or ECV, nested virtualization, and enhanced nested virtualization. I'll let you go ahead and read Marius' article if you want to find about QME 9.0's edition supporting RISC-V. Unless you like hearing me rant on about with all those different numbers.
So one of the things that I'm trying to figure out, and looking at the actual the QEMU wiki, when they're talking about adding these things and the things that are missing from Raspberry Pi, I believe that is Raspberry Pi 4B as an emulated board. So like you're running on probably an x86 server and you want to have a virtual Raspberry Pi, probably to be able to do compilation or code testing. They now have the Raspberry Pi 4B as an available board, but they don't yet have Ethernet or PCI working on it, which is interesting. What I'm not sure about is like what the state is for trying to do something like QEMU or KVM on the Pi. That's what I at first thought this was going to be about.
What I want to know is they've got HPPA emulation, but do they have HP 48 emulation? As for the people on the audio, I'm holding up my HP 48G calculator that I used in college.
You're asking the real questions there.
Yeah. Verse Polis notation and everything. I would imagine that there is already an open source project to emulate that thing.
There are.
Yep.
Probably several.
Yeah.
I was just being obnoxious. I've actually got it on my Android phone, my iPhone for work, and there's also one that I have on my PC as well.
Jeff is something of an HP calculator nerd among all of his other bits of nerdery.
I am not a I'm a nerd with lots of breadth.
There you go. Which you know, to be a little bit more generous, we would say that Jeff is a Renaissance man. He has a lot of interests, but it's more fun to call him a nerd. And it is definitely a case of the pot calling the kettle black. That term applies equally to all of us.
I've been called a geek, and I do have an electrical engineering degree. And for those electrical engineers in the audience, you cannot spell geek without a double E.
It's true. All right, David, let's talk about putting Linux in your car. It's funny. When I was much younger, before even the first Raspberry Pi came out, I was super interested in this idea of building a little tiny Linux computer for having a car computer. And way back in the day, they would have these little tiny x86 boards. I don't think I have one of the real small ones here, but I've got a couple of the small-ish boards. And this is before I had a job, before I had any money to speak of. And I was always looking at it like, man, that'd be cool to be able to buy one of those little tiny boards and put Linux on it. And then, of course, the Raspberry Pi came out and made all of that sort of old and not the way to do anything anymore. Now it's pretty trivial to put a Raspberry Pi in a car. But I think what your story is car makers doing that a little bit more officially, right?
Well, it's actually even slightly deeper than that, because we're not talking about the head units or the infotainment system, but we're talking about the entire car. So I linked to an Ars Technica article called Linux Can Finally Run Your Car's Safety Systems and Driver Assistance Features. And it goes in to some technical depth on it, but in summary, all the car systems operate through what's known as a CAN bus network, and it is a reliable protocol across wires, so that if you press the accelerator and it's not a physical connection to your carburetor anymore, that you can be absolutely sure that connection and the information about how hard you pressed it gets sent to the computer system that is now controlling your throttle. Or same with brake systems, with the driver assistance systems, crash detection, lane not avoidance, but maintaining lane control, crash avoidance, all of those systems and sensors, they have to be extremely reliable, because if it fails, there's a good chance somebody dies. So for the first time, Linux has actually been certified. It is there is a new Linux distro out made by German electronic supplier Electrobit, and it is the first open source operating system that complies with the automotive industry's functional safety requirements. And that is the first step. That is the first step to being able to be actually used to operate a car. And I'm sorry for the snicker in that, but we had a comment, how about crash assistance? I think car operators already do that quite well on their own.
They sometimes use Linux for that though too, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because a lot of crash assistance comes in the form of cell phone use, and most of those are on Android.
But they specifically talk about the fact that control the powertrain, ABS, traction, stability control systems, the radar, cameras, ultrasonic sensors, processing the data, and controlling it partially or fully with the automated driving systems. And then so there are two interesting things about this. Number one is that this stuff has always been kind of just piecemealed on. So you wind up with possibly 200 discrete controllers in a modern vehicle that are doing different parts, all talking on the CAN bus. It gets very busy. And so they're trying to clean sheet that and go down to just a couple of primary control, what they call domain controllers that control various parts of that system. And they break it up into basically processing domains. And then that is what they're doing. Now, the other interesting thing about this article is how they get this certification. What they do, because you're dealing with system that both has to be kept up to date constantly because security is a big issue and there are more standards coming out about that. But then on the other side, it has to be absolutely stable. So, and they mentioned specifically, they could certify something and then 5 kernel patches later, it would no longer be certified. So what they actually do, and they said this is very common for this kind of system, is they have a hypervisor that runs on top of the operating system that talks to a hardware interface below the operating system so they can certify both ends of it. And then what's in the middle is not actually certified, the Linux kernel, and so it can be maintained and updated without breaking certification. So it's just a very interesting, and not just simply the possibility of it being the Linux car before Apple ever gets a car, but just the whole process of, how you have to think about those sorts of things when you're talking about safety critical infrastructure. I found it very interesting, so I brought it forth.
Yeah, very much so. I'm wondering if the real-time patches are part of this, and I would imagine they would have to be to be able to do. I was
actually looking for that, and maybe the Ars Technica didn't get deep enough into it to mention that because I was expecting that to be part of it.
Yeah, and one of the other things that I saw that really fascinated me is apparently Canonical's worked with them on this.
Yes,
Ken.
Yeah, I was about to mention that it looks like Electrobit had partnered with Canonical and is going to share the maintenance of keeping it compliant. I wonder if Canonical's the ones that's helping with providing real-time kernel patching.
That's Intel generally. Intel is the one that's been bankrolling that. Although maybe Canonical has had a hand in it now more recently.
I will be honest, I'm kind of skeptical about them, all the updates and whatnot, because the CAN bus was originally a serial bus, and it was designed to save copper in cars. And I can tell you from a hardware standpoint, they will swap out alternators and water pumps before they will change out the electronics in a vehicle. The amount of redesign they will do on all other components versus the electronics is amazing. The electronics they make for years, and they do not like to upgrade. They do not like to change. They want to keep that rolling for as long as they can, which is interesting.
Yeah, I was going to say, I would assume, though, kind of like what Tesla's done and stuff, that as these car manufacturers are embracing EVs, and you don't have water pumps, you don't have alternators, you don't have all this other stuff, that it becomes much more software focused. And, you know, you're just shunting power from one place to another and then doing a lot of processing around sensors.
Yeah.
And that's an oversimplification, in fairness.
Right. And they do have a lot of brain boxes now all over cars. It's not, you know, not like the older days where you just had one box. It's like, okay, this controls everything. Mm-hmm. Now you got engine and entertainment and transmission and braking and everything, you know, so they're all over the car now too. It's not just in one place. But a lot of the electronics, they are very, very slow to update. And part of that is because, at least the hardware side, I don't know the software, but you have to comply with an automotive standard 16949, which is built on top of ISO 9001. And there's a lot of auditing that goes into that. And it, a lot like a lot of ISO standards and the automotive standards, it basically boils down to, you know, do what you say and say what you do. But it's amazing how much, like I said, they will replace a water pump and redesign it 3 different times before they will change a brain box.
Yeah.
In this article, it specifically calls out IEC 61508 standard for STAFI applications. And then it also mentions that starting in July, there's going to be a UN ECE R155 that's going to require continuous cybersecurity management for all software that ends up in vehicles. And
okay, so that's
a
good.
UN regulation. So that's kind of interesting. Yes.
You know what this makes me think? I need to learn how to fix distributor caps and go back to one of those cars.
3D print, 3D printer, and spools of wire.
There you go.
Well, when you fix that distributor cap, you're not going to have to worry about the car reporting all your driving habits back to some big, corporate conglomerate.
Exactly. You know, my 2 cars, the older one is a 97 Ford Ranger, and it is even new enough that it's got a computer in it of some sort. No, a very, you know, I mean, it may literally be a 6502 in there. Who knows? But it's got a computer of some sort. And so I've had this thought recently. It's like, man, it would be nice to have one of those old cars that doesn't have any computer in it, and it's just all electromechanical.
But at that age, it's not hard to switch back to a. You could put an aftermarket fuel injection system in, and
that's true.
Get away with dumping the computer.
That's true. But of course, you would have to then have the aftermarket computer to run the fuel injection system.
Yeah, but you can get that from, you know, Edelbrock and Holly and all those kind of, you know.
That's true. All right, let's see. We've talked about the year of the Linux car. Oh, hey, I have a new show idea for TWiT. I figured I would pitch it here first. I figure we should do the new MS-DOS show. And the reason is that MS-DOS 4.0 is now open source. And so I am sure that it is about to experience a massive resurgence as everyone wants to jump on board and install MS-DOS 4.0 because it's now open source and free. Free software license, man.
Yeah, I saw that article.
Ken, you remember 4.0, right?
He's got the only hardware left that'll run it.
I would not be surprised.
I also remember Spartados.
Yeah, I would not be surprised that now with it open source, there's a fork of it and somebody starts working on making it run on more up-to-date systems, because that's just the sort of thing that happens. So the whole story here is actually a little bit more interesting than that. I'm very much tongue-in-cheek about the show idea, of course. But what actually happened is there was a researcher, Starfrost, who was looking for I think he came up with these disks, these MS-DOS disks that were labeled. And you have to click through the various stories and the links here to find this. But it's like these disks were labeled, proprietary, do not share, confidential Microsoft beta release. And he's got these, these 2 big floppy disks of MS-DOS beta release of 4.0. And he came back across them and went to the people at Microsoft and said, hey, can we do a release of this? It's so old. It's really interesting for archival purposes. And got the right people at Microsoft to sign off on it. And so there is now an open sourced release of MS-DOS 4.0 and the beta binaries. And I believe, I don't remember if the one that they released is the multitasking version or if they're still trying to come up with that source code. But something that new that was like experimental in MS-DOS 4 was the ability to do true multitasking in DOS. And part of the story is that they're trying to get that released as well. Yeah, so it's fun. It's neat. There's now MS-DOS. It's open source.
So I just did some quick Googling here, and evidently you can get MS-DOS running on QEMU. So we can.
There you go.
I don't know why we'd want to, but we can.
Yep. So
it's the challenge.
Yeah. The repository here has MS-DOS v1.25, v2.0, and now version 4 source code. And people have extrapolated this and suggested that we'll get the full release of 5.0 in another 10 years, and in about 100 years or so, we'll get to the source of Windows XP.
Well, Tom Nardi said we might see it by sometime in the 2030s.
Yeah, that's what I was referring to.
I remember we had an old piece of equipment that ran. I think it might have been 4, and when the hard drive went, they put in like a 1 gig drive or something like that, but it was still too big. They had to partition it down to like under 256 megs or something like that, and a lot of just to keep it running. There was a lot of hoops to go through.
I have helped several people out by taking their old like MS-DOS or Windows, in one case it was a Windows 3.1 machine, and taking their software and running it in DOSBox, and that is quite the fun adventure. Particularly when they need to print, because like DOSBox is great for running games, but there are certain things that just DOSBox itself doesn't do, and you have to go and like get these weird forks of it where somebody's hacked it together. So DOSBox that'll print is a special problem to have to solve.
When you're probably connecting with a parallel port, and the hardware to support drives is like maybe an old MFM or something, and
it's fun stuff. There's a couple of ways to do it, but one of the more fun things that I've done is go out and buy an actual PCI. I think it's a PCI Express 1X to parallel port converter to put in somebody's desktop, because the USB ones don't work, but the actual PCI Express ones will. You can run Windows on it because that's what they wanted, so they had on the system they were putting it on, and then run DOSBox on top of that, and then their old binaries on top of DOSBox, and you can hook it up correctly, and it will actually shove the bits out the parallel port and talk to the printer. And they had some ancient line printer, I don't even remember. Still works as far as I know. They haven't called me back and complained that it was broken, so
no news is good news.
Yes. All right. Yes, Ken.
Some of the Zenith computers that the Air Force got, they'd come with a Zenith version of DOS called ZDOS.
Yeah. Old stuff. All right, Jeff, let's talk about AWK, and we're moving into our command line tips now. We have some fun ones here. Let's get the down low on AWK.
So my command line tip today is AWK, as Jonathan said, and that's to keep Jonathan happy, because he was teasing me that my tip last week was graphical, but I'm kind of sneaking this one in because some would say this is less of a command and more of a language. So this weekend I can still get under Jonathan's skin by skirting what he was looking for. So, to be serious though, I can't believe we haven't covered this before, but I can also see why. So I could finish out the rest of the year on the things that AWK can do.
Yeah.
The link in the show notes is going to go over some basic uses, but there are entire books written on AWK and getting the most out of it. And I have a link to a book, a free book on using AWK, and it goes into much more detail, and it's 585 pages long.
Mm-hmm.
So that should give you the idea of the things you can do with AWK. Some examples are it can print lines in a file, pull out lines that meet certain criteria. It can change things like spaces into hyphens or whatever you want, print only a certain range of lines in a file, all sorts of different other printing operations like extracting certain fields from a file. So it can, if you define a field as a space, it can print every third item with, based on spaces. Awk can perform calculations. I personally used it when programming some old Spark systems because the shell that it came with, and I did check this on Bash too, but these were Corn shell, it wasn't able to handle floating point math. So I had to do, and I needed floating point, so I did the calculations in awk. It can also be used to perform column calculations. So if you have a grid of numbers, you can, in a text file, it can do calculations on those. You can use arrays in awk, which a lot of you are thinking, if you can do that, you can do some really powerful manipulations on data, and you would be correct. So I'm not going to even try to go through all the things that they can do. And I'm not even going everything they call out in the article. But even at the bottom of the article, they talk about, you're reading just a quick tutorial and no way a fully comprehensive guide. So if you really want to be powerful, and awk goes back a long ways. It's I think even back in the Unix days, way back in the Unix days. Look at that 585 page book. It's GNU Awk is the book. And, even if you never become a power user, it's really handy to know a little bit of awk to get around some of those tricky problems that you can run into the shell that you can't solve easily without something like awk. So definitely give it a look, and it's a good thing to have in the toolbox.
So David is holding a now invisible book. There it is. The Said and Awk book from O'Reilly. You talked about how old awk is. Awk is actually the anagram of the three authors' names that wrote it, and the K is for Kernighan. So it is one of the things that Brian Kernighan did at Bell Laboratories. It's Alfred Aho, Peter Weinberger, and Brian Kernighan. So it is, it's been around for a long time.
And
it's
this
still useful.
Particular book, this O'Reilly book, this is second edition, which was released in 1997. And the first edition came out in 1990.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
And the thing is, when you look at those old editions, you're still going to be, it hasn't changed much over the years. So you're going to be pretty
They'll
pretty
add
safe.
new things, but generally all of the old commands will still work.
Old stuff.
Yeah, because they break everybody's systems and build scripts, and you change how awk works, you break the whole internet.
Yeah,
it is one of those tools.
It could be awkward.
It would be awkward.
Oh. Okay, next.
All right, Ken. Continue our spring cleaning.
Yes. This week, I'm going to move into part 2. And the show notes, I've got a link to some notes I put on removing unused kernels from my old 20.04 system. That's Ubuntu. Using the command dpackage or dpkg. But you can also, if you like to live dangerously, use sudo space apt-get space auto remove -- purge, and that will remove all old kernels, only keeping the most recent. Now, I'm going to caution against using that. You may want to go in and do it manually, removing them, removing the ones you no longer need, and maybe keep at least the current one and one or two recent ones instead. And then I've got a link to some notes I put on removing unused. It shows where I went through and used the dpackage -- list, piped it through grep, and searched for anything that had Linux -image in it, and then I sorted that. And the reason I sorted it is because the first column will show II for installed kernels and RC for kernels that have been removed, but the configuration files is still present. This way I get all those IIs at the front, and I can start from the bottom of the list and work backwards as I'm manually removing them. The way I remove the individual ones is I use sudo apt sudo apt-get purge Linux image dash then the kernel number. In the one case it was dash 5.4.0-97 dash low latency. And if you look at the list, you'll see that's the last one in the screenshot I took of my list, and that would remove just that one. Now you can enter multiple kernels to remove by just adding them all on the same line, and I ended up doing about 5 at a time to speed up the process. As you remove the old kernels, I do recommend occasionally using the command dpkk dpackage -- list and piping it through grep again, just to confirm they have been removed and see what may still need to be removed until the list lists only what you want to actually keep. Now, after removing the old kernels, you should run sudo update -grub, then reboot to ensure everything is working with the remaining kernels. Now, I've got a second link in my show notes to a article by, and I'm trying to remember.
OS Technics, whoever that is.
Yep. It's written by SK, and I'm trying to remember what his actual name is. But it goes into how the RPM-based distros actually have a configuration file that lets you configure how many of the kernels you want to keep, and then it automatically removes any older than those.
Yes. Defaults to 3. Yeah, on some machines that is extremely important. If you don't have some sort of auto remove happening, you will eventually fill up your /boot, and that just it doesn't go well. All right. Let's let David take it for a minute and talk about. I feel like we've covered this as a command line before, but you've got a neat trick up its sleeve.
Yes, I plan to take advantage of the depths of TMUX and mention this or cover different aspects of TMUX in the future as well. So what I wanted to mention today were two things, and I actually experienced them myself, which reminded me because I did some distro hopping. And when I distro hop, I don't save anything. I like to start over from scratch and build my system back up, because then I know I didn't bring any negative energy with me.
Yeah.
But what happened was I went to use TMUX and it didn't work the way I expected it to. So I had to do some Googling because it had been so long since I built it, I didn't remember it off the top of my head. So that's what I'm specifically talking about. So the first thing is there are two places that TMUX gets its configuration from. Two files it looks for. One is in your local home directory, which is the .tmux.conf. And I don't know if we've ever touched on it before, but when a file has a dot as the very first character, that makes it a hidden file, just mainly so that when you do directory listings, it doesn't clutter up, because you may have a bunch of different setting files, things like that. And then the other location is /etc/tmux.conf. So /etc being system global configurations, and then your home folder config being ones that only affect you. So even though these are my systems, I still just keep it local, because I don't have any reason to go out there and mess with the system version. But the three things that I do, the three commands that I touch on here, do two things. They allow you to use the mouse in the TMUX window to actually get to access your copy buffer and scroll back into your history with your mouse wheel. And then also when you select with your mouse TMUX has its own copy paste buffer, like other editors can do and stuff. But most of the time, we're running TMUX from a terminal, and it's very helpful to be able to interact with the copy buffer in some other application. And these commands only work on newer versions of TMUX. I think it's 3.2 and newer. But if you're installing TMUX on a modern OS, you'll get the latest version. So I didn't mention that in any detail. But the first one is set. So you just list these line by line in your tmux.conf. The first one is set-G, which means it's a global configuration change, mouse on. That says, hey, I want to be able to use the mouse in TMUX. As soon as you do that command, you can click and highlight in a TMUX window. You can right-click and get a menu of options, and you can use your scroll wheel to scroll back past the top of your terminal window to see things that may have scrolled off the window. One note about using the mouse in TMUX, the menu is not like what you're used to in a traditional GUI. You don't right click and get the menu and then select from it. It appears while you're holding your right mouse button, and then you have to move your mouse to the entry you want. And as soon as you let go of your right mouse button, it's going to take that entry. So if you think of it like a traditional menu where you right click and then it pops up and you can go select it. If you do that in TMUX, as soon as you release your mouse, it'll disappear and you won't be able to use it. So that's the mouse functionality. Then the second functionality is, how do you get the TMUX's clipboard contents into your system clipboard so that you can, paste it somewhere else. The second option is probably not required because it's the default, but just to be safe, we can stick it in there. And this one is set space -S space set -clipboard space external. This -S means we're setting a server setting. I hadn't really talked about how TMUX is configured, but basically it's got Windows and a server system which allows you to share, and I'll get into that another time. As I told you, I plan to spend some time on TMUX, so we'll talk about that later. But the point is that these are server commands that we need to set here. And then the next one is set space -S space copy -command, and then inside quotes Excel-I. I do make the note that you may need to install the Excel package, but it's included in all OS package managers. What that does is, before this was added in TMUX 3.2, you had to do some really hinky stuff to get it to work with long pipes and things. But they actually said, hey, this is something a lot of people need. So they just made a simple command that does it. And what it does is, as soon as you send something into TMUX's copy buffer, it pipes it to the input of whatever you put after copy command. So Excel is a command line tool that with the -I will read the input and paste it into your clipboard.
Oh, nice.
So with that command, you can be in TMUX with mouse on, select any text, and it will instantly be in your clipboard. Finally, the reason why this is important versus just using your built-in terminal functionality is because TMUX allows you to break your window up into panes, so you can have different things happening in different parts of the same terminal window. It's one of the very powerful and useful functionalities. Mm-hmm. If you use your terminal's copy functionality, it won't know anything about panes, and so you'll get lines from all your different panes, whatever you're trying to select. Whereas TMUX's mouse functionality understands panes, so you can select within a pane.
That's real helpful. That's real helpful. Very good. Okay, I've got a fun command line tip. Let's see if I can quickly do another screen share here. Window, I want that window, and there we go. So I do some programming, and I will occasionally use git diff to look at whatever it is that I've been programming and look at the patch file. And if you just run a git diff and look at it, it's kind of difficult to tell, particularly when you have lines like this, where you have something was removed and something else was added, and you're looking at it trying to figure out, all right, what exactly was added and removed there? And I have come across a really, really slick application that makes this a little bit better. It's ydiff. So you could just take your diff output, like git diff, and then pipe it right into the ydiff application, and it will do this. It will do highlighting. And so you can see, it maybe only one thing has changed on a particular line to look at. It'll show you what has been removed, what has been added, some neat stuff. And then it's got one more trick up its sleeve, and that is you could do the -S, and ydiff will give you a side-by-side view of the two things. And so, really, really useful stuff that you can do with it. So ydiff, it is... it's cool. I like it. I like it a lot. Right. There we go. Now we're back to us.
Do you need to pipe into diff, or can it just read the files itself?
I don't think ydiff reads files itself. I think you have to pipe into it. I think it just comes from the input. I think it can read a patch file, but I don't think it does the diffing itself. Just reinterprets a diff.
Well, I prefer graphical diffs just because I find they're easier to work with. But if you got to do it from the command line, that's pretty nifty.
It is. Yeah, it's really cool. So, all right, let's see. What else do we have? I think that is it for the command line tips. Let's see. Yeah. So let's get into our ending notes, and I will let each of you get kind of the last word in if you want to. We'll start with David, actually. Anything you want to plug?
Actually, I do. As I've talked a little bit today, we're getting into some Flutter development. We talked about the web dev stuff. I do that as a contract programmer for one of my clients. We've talked a little bit before. That I have an IT company, and I do a little bit of everything. Jack of all trades. I feel you there. Anyway, so if anyone is, I would say within 2 hours of Wilmington, North Carolina, because it's not a fully remote position, it's a hybrid, probably 1 day a month to 1 day a week in office, and the rest will be remote. Look me up on LinkedIn. The easiest way to find me, I tested this, is to search for the David Factor. All is one word. I am the only result for that. If you search for David Ruggles, there are a lot of us. But I'm the only one that shows up with the David Factor. Connect with me. I try to check it about once a week or so it might be a little bit slow. But if you do programming and live within 2 hours of Wilmington, North Carolina, and are looking for an opportunity, part-time, full-time, contract, hit me up. Maybe it'll work out.
Excellent. Yeah, it sounds like fun. All right, and Ken.
Yes, I want to share, in the show notes, I've got a link to an article by Al Williams that is a great introduction to hacking systemd to run a program on startup. I definitely recommend reading it, and even some of his other Linux U articles that he's put out there.
Yeah, Al is the best. Al is really cool. Al Williams, for those that don't know, is actually a retired Commodore engineer that now writes for Hackaday and is just outstanding. He's great. All right, and Jeff.
All I've got is a poetry corner. So I've got my haiku again this week. Printer not ready. Could be a fatal error. Have a pen handy. And everybody, have a great week.
All right, awesome. Thank you everyone for being here, for the guys for joining me, and those of you watching live. We have had I think we had up to like 64 people watching us live in the various places that this went out to. So that was fun. Quite a few stuck around till the end. We appreciate that. And then those of you on the download, we appreciate each of our listeners and watchers. If you want to come connect with us, you can do it over on Discord, part of Club TWiT. And if you're looking for me, you can find more of my work over at Hackaday and all kinds of other places. But the security column goes live Friday mornings over on Hackaday. I would love to see you there. Thank you, everyone, and we will see you next week on the Untitled Linux Show.